Hey everybody, Tom Barnes, Stories from the 78. By way of technology, I'm welcoming a former Chicagoan back to Chicago. She's the author of The Spare Man, Ghost Talkers, the Glamourist Histories series, Lady Astronaut universe. She's a part of the award-winning podcast Writing Excuses, four-time Hugo Award winner. Her fiction appears everywhere. She is amazing, fantastic, and she is a puppeteer. Do I need to say more? She's got a book signing coming up here in the Chicago area this week. I'm talking about Mary Robinette. How are you today?
I'm doing really well, thank you.
Thanks for joining me on the program here. I appreciate it very much. It seems I before we got started, I saw your cat in the background. How's she doing?
She is doing great. This is Elsie. Hello, sweet girl. She is being extremely patient with me.
She was speaking a little while ago.
That's right. I gave her buttons. If people have seen the buttons that on social media, so Elsie uses those to communicate. She has 130 words.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
it's
incredible.
Wild. It's really wild. But it also means that I can do things like asking her to be quiet while I'm talking to someone, and she's usually pretty good about it. Sometimes she decides that I have done too much work.
Well, and I feel like our families would do that to us anyway. So, like,
exactly.
Our human families, I should say.
Yeah, it is like having a toddler who is covered in fur and also an alien.
Speaking of, you have a fantastic new addition to your book series. You're going to be here in Chicago at a Anderson Books on the 22nd of March here, and then another spot up in Naperville. I'm sorry, I'm flipping them. Anderson's in Naperville,
yes.
And then Volumes up on Milwaukee Avenue there.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because I was living in Chicago in the Ukrainian village for about 7 years, and Volumes was my hometown store. So big portions, I think the first two novels were written, a lot of them were written in Volumes Bookcafe. So it feels very much like coming home every time I'm back in Chicago.
Hurry. Very cool. What other...
She has decided that this is enough and just said, hurry, yes.
Well, I'll try to hurry. But I wanted to ask you, no, it's fine. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your time in Chicago, just because, anybody that's from Chicago that goes on to do things that you have. I mean, you've had like many careers. Which one's your favorite? You've done a bunch.
Puppetry is probably actually the favorite. I spent about 20 years doing that. Live theater, television, film, and it's something I deeply, deeply love. But the prospect of doing live theater again, especially touring into an elementary school again, I'm 56 years old and I just can't. Not anymore. I can still wiggle a dolly, but the grind is hard to face.
I mean, is that hard on your body to do that like over and over, right?
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of different styles of puppetry. The type that most people are familiar with, which is film and television, is ergonomically unsound. Most of the styles are. It's like you're an actor, but then you're also acting through a figure that can weigh up to, the biggest puppet I worked was weighed 125 pounds. So
holy cow. That's not small at all.
No, it's not. That's the Audrey 2. The biggest plant weighs between 80 to 125 pounds. And then when you're doing video puppetry, you're often standing like this, with your arm up in the air. Every time I have an injury and I go into an occupational therapist and I have to show them what I do, and they're like, "Oh, please don't do that." No, I'm like, "I'm sorry, that's the job."
Yeah.
So I love that. I also do audiobook narration, which I describe as puppetry without the pain.
Yeah, I saw that. I did read up on you a little bit, and that was one of your last quotes on your page there. But I've always wondered. I've met a few, and I just covered something here in Chicago called the Women of Color Puppetry Fringe Festival.
Oh, nice.
It's happening at the Joe B. Art Center in Bridgeport, and they've been going on for a few weeks now. And I've been meaning to ask them, what happens when you're like in the middle of the show and you're doing that pose that you were doing before, where you're doing this whole thing, and you have an itch, and it's one of those, of course it itches itch. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. You just keep going.
That's
Sometimes
discipline.
you can let go of the figure. So like when you're doing video puppetry, you've got one hand up here
Mhm.
and then the other hand is down here working rods. But if you're doing something like a tabletop figure where the puppets are directly in front of you, often you can, even with video, you can let go of the rods, take care of it. The biggest, the one that's the least friendly for this is a style called check black. Where you're dressed from head to toe in black velvet, and you put the puppet into a beam of light. So the puppet looks normal, like it's under normal stage lights, but you don't appear, but you are wearing a hood. And so it's just, you can't get to anything, and you're hot and you're sweaty. You can't breathe well.
I'm sorry if that's probably the dumbest questions you've ever had to answer for puppetry. I've just always been curious, and I wanted to ask a professional.
Yeah, no, that is actually a good question that I don't think anyone has asked me before.
Yeah.
The one that people ask me that I always look at them blankly is, how many puppets do you have? And I'm like, I have literally no idea.
That's like asking somebody who loves records how many records they have in their vinyl collection, right?
Yeah, exactly.
When I was reading a little bit about you, and you were talking about your time as a puppeteer, you weren't really writing then. You were writing in high school. You didn't really write professionally up until, did I read right that your brother moved away and you wanted to use writing as a connection with your nieces?
Yeah, that's correct. He was living in China, and I used to read them bedtime stories, but this was before Skype was really reliable.
Sure.
So what I started doing was writing a serial from them, and I was like, oh, right. I used to love doing this. And it had been about a 10-year gap in there. And then while I was doing that, I was like, oh, I think I have something here. And because I come out of the arts, my mom was an arts administrator. I'm trained that actually you can make a living at most forms of art if you figure out the path. And so I was like, well, how do you do this with writing? Started writing short fiction. And for a long time, the two careers were very evenly balanced, or the three careers, I guess, actually. Whatever. And so in a lot of ways, what I think of myself as is a freelancer. And I have a couple of different income streams. Puppetry was the most reliable for a really long time. Writing is now, and audiobooks could be if I were easier to schedule, but I'm not.
Well, those sound like good problems.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. She has returned.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Anything she wants to say?
No, don't ask.
Sorry.
She will. Like, I have done interviews before where they really wanted to talk to Elsie as well, and so we've gone over to her button board, and and she'll say things like, rude, all done. So,
wow. For those who are watching right now and they're hearing us talk about this, how did that start for you with talking to your cat the way that you do?
So I had been doing research on a novel, which isn't out yet. And I was looking at language acquisition in animals and stumbled across a woman named Christina Hunger, who's a speech and language therapist. And she was like, what happens if I use the same techniques that I use for my nonverbal patients with my new puppy? And the answer is that there's a global movement. So Elsie and I started doing that. And I just wanted her to be able to tell me what toy she wanted to play with. You know how a cat will come up to you and they clearly want to play, and you offer them a toy and they're like,
it's like 20 minutes
of that. Could you be more insulting?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Now she can tell me what she wants to play with. It took her 6 months before she made her first button press. In hindsight, some of that was decisions that I had made. Some of it was we were having construction done, so it was a little bit chaos. My dog Guppy, I did things differently. She began using her buttons on day one and has a 10-word vocabulary, and all of them mean either outside or friend as far as she's concerned. She's very dog, very dog.
I was going to say, how many for the cat versus the dog?
130.
Yeah. Well,
yeah. So you get things like she'll, it's weird because she can tell me exactly what she wants to play. Sometimes she'll make up games, but there's also stuff where she will talk about grief. We had to have her companion cat put to sleep, and she would say his name and then sad.
That's heartbreaking.
It was heartbreaking.
Oh,
and then
goodness.
I don't understand why. And I'm just like, baby girl, I don't know how to explain this to you. And then like a year after he had died, she asked for a coat, because it's cold, and one of the things I was surprised to learn is that my cat likes to wear clothes sometimes. So I always offer her Denver, 2 choices.
Right? So,
Yeah. And she's a Chicago cat. Like, she came from Chicago. She should be able to handle the cold. She was a
maybe
sweet
it's the
kitten.
elevation.
That must be it.
Because we're down at sea level down here.
That's true. Yeah, that's probably exactly what it is. Thank you for solving that scientific mystery for me.
That's what I'm here for.
Anyway, so I offer her 2 coats, and one of them was Helix's old coat. And she smells it, and she goes over to her button board and says, "Smell Helix."
Oh my gosh.
And I'm just like, okay, well, I'm not going to stop crying today, and that's going to be fine.
Yeah, well.
So I was not expecting anything like that. Nothing like that.
I was going to say, yes, but you probably can file that in the "I didn't expect this to happen ever" category when writing books, right?
No. I was really skeptical about it when I first saw it. I was like, yeah, is this language acquisition, or is this like stimulus response? And I'm like, oh, it is, I think it is language. It's certainly communication. Linguists can have the arguments about what is language. All I know is that she will do compound words when she doesn't have a button to describe a thing she wants, like a reflection from your phone. She jumped on the back of a chair, tried to get to it. You know how cats love those reflections.
Yes. Yep.
Jumps down and says "want," and then jumps back on the chair, tries to get to it, and jumps back down and says "bird laser."
That's incredible.
Right?
That's almost creepy incredible.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like, well, what else? Yeah, what else would you call it? Of course.
Yeah, that's something
I mean,
else.
with the words you have, sure, bird laser. Yeah, that makes sense.
Wow. I mean, it's good. Yeah. I mean, I imagine that doing this kind of research and the hands-on research you had with your cat there helps you formulate another story, the story you're working on, all of this, or gives you ideas you never thought about before it.
Oh yeah, it's fundamentally changing the way I approach writing aliens when I'm writing science fiction. Even if I'm writing fantasy or just an animal, it's like, oh yeah, no, their view and understanding of the world is completely different from mine. Like with the bird laser, I don't know if it was bird because it was in the air. If it was because it was fluttering. I don't know if it was laser because it was bright or because it was moving fast. Like, I don't know what the word means to her, but we have enough of an overlapping understanding. And so like when I'm thinking about how do I write an alien, it's like, yeah, we're going to have overlapping understandings, but not necessarily have the same definition for this, for each word.
Sure.
And that leaves like so much room, delicious room for misunderstandings.
Oh, man, I mean, I just imagine it's just infinite for you to be able to come up with these things. And when you were doing all the primarily the puppeteer work, were you a big fantasy person while that was all going on? I mean, always. I know you're in the puppeteer world, so it's all kind of encompassing, but were you like, man, one of these days I got to write a novel? Or did it really just kind of come about when you had this yearning to connect with your family?
Well, I had written what I call my novel zero, which no one is ever going to read.
I think I have one of those too.
I started it in high school. I worked on it while I was on tour with puppet theater. And so I had this idea about writing a novel, but I didn't I didn't think of it as actually a thing that people did except for fun.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And it wasn't until after I'd had there were two things. One was writing this thing for my brother, and the other thing was that I had a severe puppet injury. The giant man-eating plant with Little Shop of Horrors, I had a show go just a little bit wrong,
What does that mean?
and wound up in a cast
Oh no.
for a year.
That's a lot wrong, I would think,
It's a
for a
lot wrong.
year.
So
Yeah.
yeah. The thing on the stage was just a little bit wrong. The repercussions were a lot wrong.
Oh my,
So it was,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
close to a year in a cast, and then close to another year doing physical therapy just to try to get things back.
Wow.
Yeah, it turns out if you can't roll your hand over as a puppeteer, that's kind of bad. I mean, it's not great for anybody, but real bad for a puppeteer.
Sure. Wow.
But I started writing again. I'd started with the thing for my niece and nephew, and because I couldn't, I'm right hand dominant, and I figured out how to perform left-handed. I was trained to be ambidextrous there,
Mm-hmm.
but building puppets with tools when you're right hand dominant, that was significantly harder. And it turned out that a lot of my creative energy had been going into puppetry, and that the act of designing a puppet show and building a puppet show used very much the same parts of my brain that writing did. It's all problem solving and character creation and world building. So when I wasn't doing that, suddenly the writing parts of my brain kind of lit up again.
That's
And
awesome.
so I started writing short fiction, um, and then was doing a NaNoWriMo as kind of a way to connect to people. And that was sort of I can do this. This is a thing that's fun.
Yeah.
Um, and just sort of it spiraled from there.
And here you are. I mean, you've done some things in your career with the SAG-AFTRA and the movies that the film and theater, the puppeteer stuff, the book. I mean, podcasting. I mean,
Yeah.
you're doing all of the things, and I love that. Puppeteering is still the thing that kind of is near and dear to your heart. When you were in Chicago, what were you doing at that time? I know you said you were writing a couple of those earlier books, but what brought you to Chicago, I guess, is my question.
My husband was the winemaker for City Winery.
Oh, I've been there a couple times. That's very
Yeah.
cool.
So yeah, we had most of the moves up to that point had been for my job. We lived in Iceland, we lived in New York, Portland, Oregon. And so this job opened up, and winemaking, he was already a winemaker, but winemaker jobs don't open up often.
Sure.
People tend to get the job and then just stay there until they retire. And so we moved to Chicago. I was doing some puppetry, but mostly I would like travel to New York to do like an IBM industrial, where you're sitting there for a couple of days crammed under a desk and trying to pretend like you're typing with a puppet.
Okay.
So it was mostly at that point I was doing film and television work, because to do stage, you have to commit a pretty big chunk of time to be available for rehearsal,
Yeah, I
and then
imagine.
another chunk of time to be available to perform. So there just wasn't a lot. I didn't have that time available, and the return on investment was no longer as good.
Mm-hmm.
So the puppetry that I was doing in Chicago was either traveling elsewhere,
Mm-hmm.
or I was building things for people, props, masks, puppets, that kind of thing.
Not as much fun. Fun, but not as much fun.
It's a different kind of fun.
Yeah.
Like I can perform and write in parallel. My first novel was written on the set of a children's television show called Lazy Town.
Mm-hmm.
I say on the set, in the green room, but those two things seem to be completely compatible. But construction is a little bit different.
Yeah,
But
and it's
yeah,
always variable. I'm pretty sure I've interviewed your husband before.
you may have.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. now thinking about it, and I so tell him I said hello, even though he probably doesn't remember who I am as much as I'm pretty sure I remembered him. So either way,
Yeah. Yeah. If you remember a winemaker that I would describe him as the love child of Mr. Darcy and Eeyore.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
I
I love him very much, but he has been living his entire life waiting to become the age where he could become the aged curmudgeon that he is at his core.
the older I get, the more I understand what that means. More, so I mean, I'm just saying. In your time in Chicago, like when you come back and do things, is there a spot you like to go to outside of the bookstores that make you like? Did you have a good time when you were here? I mean, 7 years is a good chunk of time.
Yeah. We were in the Ukrainian village, so I will always drop down to, if it's in season, I'll always go to Black Dog Gelato,
Oh yeah,
which is amazing. Violet Hour is probably my favorite bar anywhere.
that's an outstanding bar.
Yeah, when we lived there, I was walking distance from Fluvogs, which was a real problem.
There's a bar, I can't remember the name of it, in the Ukrainian village, and it was themed like theatrical. I'm trying to remember.
Oh wait, in the Ukrainian village.
Or maybe West Town, but I thought it was Ukrainian village.
There was
They
it
did
was
like
like a
plays.
gaming bar kind of thing where you could go in and play card games.
Yes, and
Yeah.
but they had like actual, like at one point they had like plays they would put on, and I want to say they did like puppet shows too, because when you walk into the bar and you go in the back, you would see like the tragedy and comedy, and then I can't remember. I can see it. It has like a yellow sign. It's on the corner. Oh man. Well, I'm sorry. I'm drawing a blank on it, but I haven't been there in a while, but it was one of my favorite spots. And I was really happy to see that it made it past the pandemic and it reopened. But it was like on a random street, like in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
It wasn't like on a major street, but
I don't know where that was. That sounds like my jam too.
It was awesome. It was a good time. I'm not going to lie. But yeah, Chicago would be excited to welcome you back here. I'm sure your fans and your friends and family that were here with you are excited that you'll be back in town here, but you'll be here next Friday and Saturday, spending time signing your book, hanging out with people. What are you excited about that when you come back?
I'm excited about seeing people, one. And the way I describe this with books is like when I'm doing live theater, I'm having a synchronous experience with the audience. We're having the same experience at the same time. And with puppets, we have this saying, do you know the difference between playing with dolls and a puppet show?
What is it?
One of them has an audience. And so for me, the show happens in between the performer and the audience. And I think it's the same thing with writing. Like I write the thing, but I am relying on you to build images in your head.
Right.
So
I love that.
It's like people talk about me having a bunch of different careers, but in my brain, they are all the same career. It's just storytelling. It's just I use different mediums for it.
Yep.
Exactly. Right. So the thing that I love about book tour is that it is the time that I get to meet my collaborators. And that is very exciting for me.
Yeah, I've said this to many people before when they like I'll use an example, a really bad example, but it's the best one I can think of right now. The Blair Witch Project. You remember that movie from years ago? So everyone's like, oh, like that movie sucked, blah, 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 or whatever. And I was like, you're looking at it wrong. Like if you look at it in the way where what's terrifying is what you concoct in your brain, what you can't see. That's what makes that movie so incredibly terrifying. Yeah. At least when it came out, when everybody thought it was like the first found footage movie, right? And I was like, I don't know, 20 years old when that came out. And that to me was terrifying. And my brain made it more terrifying. And I had that argument forever with people. They thought I was nuts, but I know what you mean.
Jaws, Jaws, which is a big old puppet show. They had a mechanical shark puppet. And the original plan had been for it to be in a lot more shots than it's actually in, but it kept malfunctioning. And so they had to rework it. So you just see like the passing of a fin, you just see pieces of it. And they realized that was significantly more terrifying than when they showed the entire shark. And I think it is one of the things we talk about with puppet theater in particular, that because anytime the audience has to participate,
Hmm.
they have to put part of themselves in it. So one of the things that
Yes.
puppets do better than human actors do is die, because they become an inanimate object again, and the part that the audience had put into them also gets killed a little bit.
Ah, which resonates so well with them then. They take it, they feel it. It's a
Hmm.
immersive experience.
Yes, and I think
Uh,
books do the same thing,
absolutely.
that you have to be a participant in it, and so it can hit you in completely different ways than a movie or a television show does. Frank Oz, who directed Little Shop of Horrors, he's better known as Miss Piggy for a lot of people.
Uh-huh.
um, they filmed the stage play ending, which ends with spoilers, everybody dying.
Right.
um, but it didn't screen well for theater audiences, and he realized that when you watch a play, you know that the actors are going to get up and take a bow, but when you watch a
Oh.
movie, they're just dead.
Right, that's it, and people are mad and upset
Yeah,
or really
yeah,
depressed after it. That's
yeah.
fascinating. Thank you for sharing that little bit of your knowledge there, just because there's so many times when you read a book and you're like, "That book was fantastic," and then you go see the movie and you're like, "That was hot garbage. What happened to
Hmm.
the book?" And it's
Yeah,
because that's somebody's interpretation of
yeah,
the story they read. So all that encompasses there. So thank you so much for
yeah.
taking time to chat with me. It's St. Patrick's Day weekend here in Chicago. I don't know if you remember what that was like, but it's 80
Oh,
degrees
yes.
today. It's 80 degrees and it's St. Patrick's Day
What?
week. Yes. I was on a bike. I was
That's not,
sweating, shorts and t-shirts, the whole thing.
that is not right. And,
Yeah.
whew, yeah, no,
Yeah.
nothing
So
about that is right.
wish this city luck this weekend is all I
Good
could
luck.
say. But I'm sure there'll be plenty for you to do when you get here, and the city will be safe. But we'll see you back here the following weekend for your book signings again up at Volume Books on North Milwaukee, Anderson Books, which is a great spot out in downtown Naperville. Mary Robinette, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. Absolute pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks so much, Tom. It was a delight.